Susan Schneider woke up at 10:30 a.m. on August 11th, 2014, and immediately knew something was wrong. The house was too quiet. Robin's bedroom door was still closed, unusual for someone who was always up early. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Silence. When she opened that door, she found the scene that would change everything. But what haunts her most isn't what she found. It's what Robin had written on a piece of paper on his nightstand. The previous evening, August 10th, had been strange, but not unusual by the standards of the previous few months. Robin had been struggling severely with insomnia, anxiety, and paranoia. His doctors thought it was Parkinson's disease, but the medications weren't helping. Nothing was helping. Robin and Susan had been married since 2011. In their 3 years together, they'd never slept in separate bedrooms. But Robin's symptoms had become so severe that he'd asked Susan to sleep separately. He didn't want his thrashing, his nightmares, his 3 a.m. panic attacks to disturb her sleep. Susan had agreed, though it broke her.
"Good night, Robin," Susan called through the door. "I love you." "Good night, my love," Robin replied. His voice sounded tired, but calm. "I love you too." Those were the last words Susan ever heard her husband speak. The next morning, Susan woke up around 10:30 a.m. This was late for both of them. They were usually early risers. But Susan had been so exhausted from weeks of helping Robin through his symptoms that she'd finally slept deeply. When she woke up, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. She got up and walked to Robin's bedroom. The door was still closed. She knocked. "Robin? You awake?" No response. She knocked again, louder. "Robin? Honey?" Still nothing. Susan's heart started racing. She tried the doorknob. It was locked from the inside. "Robin, I'm coming in," she called. "I'm worried about you." She used the emergency key they kept for situations like this. When Robin's anxiety got so bad, he'd lock himself in and couldn't remember he'd done it. She opened the door, and she found him. Robin Williams was gone. He'd taken his own life sometime in the night, probably in the early morning hours. The scene was devastating. But years later, in interviews, Susan would say that what haunted her most wasn't the immediate horror of that moment. It was what she found on Robin's nightstand. A piece of paper with a single word written on it. Help. Just that. One word in Robin's handwriting, written sometime before he died. He'd been asking for help. Even in his final hours, he'd been asking for help. And nobody had known how to give it to him, because nobody understood what was actually wrong. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Police, paramedics, investigators, the house filled with people. Susan had to make calls to Robin's children, to his family, to his closest friends. She had to say the words, "Robin is gone," over and over again, and each time it felt more unreal. The media descended within hours. By that afternoon, the world knew that Robin Williams had died. The initial reports said suicide. Everyone assumed depression. But Susan knew it wasn't that simple. Robin had been dealing with something far more complex than depression. In the weeks before his death, Robin's symptoms had escalated dramatically. He was having hallucinations, seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices. He was paranoid, convinced people were watching him, following him. He couldn't sleep more than 2 or 3 hours a night. He'd lost the ability to trust his own mind. The hardest part, Susan later said in an interview, was watching Robin know that his brain was failing. He was aware that something was terribly wrong. He'd say to me, I can't trust my own thoughts anymore. I don't know what's real. That awareness, knowing you're losing your mind while it's happening, is a special kind of torture. Robin had been to multiple doctors. They'd tried different medications. Nothing worked. The symptoms kept getting worse.
In his final week, Robin told Susan he felt like he was being attacked from within. His brain, the thing that had made him brilliant, was now his enemy. On August 8th, 3 days before his death, Robin had what Susan described as a lucid moment. He looked at her with clear eyes and said, "I just want my brain to work again. I just want to be me again." Susan held him and promised they'd figure it out. They had an appointment with a neurologist scheduled for the following week. Maybe this doctor would have answers. But Robin didn't make it to that appointment. The autopsy, conducted in the days after Robin's death, revealed what had been killing him: Lewy body dementia, one of the most aggressive, devastating forms of dementia. When the coroner who performed the autopsy examined Robin's brain, he was shocked by what he found. The dementia was severe, widespread. Robin's brain showed some of the worst Lewy body disease the coroner had ever seen. The coroner later told Susan, "I've never seen a case this advanced in someone who was still functioning at all. What your husband was experiencing in his final months must have been absolutely terrifying."
Lewy body dementia causes hallucinations, paranoia, severe anxiety, insomnia, and progressive cognitive decline. Every single symptom Robin had been experiencing was explained by this disease. But here's the devastating part. Lewy body dementia is nearly impossible to diagnose while someone is alive. The definitive diagnosis can only be made through autopsy. The symptoms look like Parkinson's, or depression, or anxiety disorders, or all three combined. Robin's doctors had been treating the symptoms they could see, but they'd been fighting the wrong enemy. Susan spent months after Robin's death trying to understand what had happened. She spoke with neurologists, read research papers, connected with other families affected by Lewy body dementia. And she came to a heartbreaking conclusion. Robin hadn't died from depression. He hadn't killed himself because he was sad. He'd escaped from a brain that had become a prison. "People think suicide is always about depression or despair," Susan said in a 2016 interview. But Robin's situation was different. His brain was literally attacking itself. He was experiencing reality in a way that was terrifying and unmanageable. What happened that night wasn't a choice made from despair. It was a desperate escape from a disease that was destroying his mind. Susan described Robin's final months as watching someone drown while standing on shore, unable to help, unable to help. "He was fighting so hard," she said. "Every day he was trying to hold on to himself, trying to function, trying to be Robin Williams. But the disease was stronger. And eventually, the person I loved was just gone. What was left was someone trapped inside a malfunctioning brain." The piece of paper with "help" written on it became, for Susan, a symbol of the tragedy. Robin had known he needed help. He'd been asking for help. But the help he needed, a cure for Lewy body dementia, didn't exist. Still doesn't exist. In the years since Robin's death, Susan has become an advocate for Lewy body dementia awareness. She speaks publicly about Robin's case, trying to help other families recognize the symptoms earlier, trying to push for more research funding. She's also spoken about what Robin's final day was like, piecing together the timeline from evidence and her own memories. On August 10th, Robin had seemed relatively calm. He'd spent time on his iPad, looking at...
This is important because it contradicts the common narrative about suicide. Robin wasn't acting like someone who decided to die. He was acting like someone planning for tomorrow. But sometime in the night, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., the time when his symptoms were always worst, something shifted. Susan believes Robin had another severe episode of hallucinations or paranoia.
His brain convinced him of something terrible, something unbearable. And in that moment, trapped in a reality that wasn't real but felt absolutely true, he made the decision to escape. "I don't think Robin wanted to die," Susan said. "I think he wanted the disease to stop. And the only way he could make it stop was to stop everything." The note he left, just that single word, help, suggests he was still hoping for rescue even as he was giving up. What makes Robin's story particularly tragic is how close medical science was to understanding his condition. If he'd lived another 6 months, another year, the doctors might have figured out it was Lewy body dementia. They might have been able to treat the symptoms more effectively. But Robin's brain didn't give him 6 more months.
Susan talks about the guilt she felt in the aftermath. Should she have insisted on more doctor appointments? Should she have recognized the symptoms? Should she have slept in the same room that night? But therapists and grief counselors helped her understand that there was nothing she could have done. Lewy body dementia is cruel and fast. Even if they diagnosed it correctly, there's no cure. The outcome might have been the same. "I've had to accept," Susan said, "that I was fighting an enemy I couldn't see and couldn't defeat. Robin was fighting that same enemy, and the enemy won. That's the simple, terrible truth." In her interviews, Susan has been careful to separate Robin Williams the person from Robin Williams the public figure. She talks about the man she knew, vulnerable, scared, fighting desperately to hold on to himself as his brain betrayed him. "The world lost Robin Williams the comedian, the actor, the entertainer," Susan said. "But I lost Robin Williams the man who made me coffee every morning, who told terrible puns, who cried during movies, who was terrified of what was happening to him and tried so hard to be brave." She's also spoken about what she wishes people understood about Lewy body dementia.
"It's not like Alzheimer's, where you slowly forget who people are," Susan explained. "With Lewy body, you know who everyone is. You're still yourself, but your brain is feeding you false information. You're hallucinating, but you know you're hallucinating. And that makes it even more terrifying. You're losing control of your own mind while being fully aware it's happening." Robin spent his final months trapped in that nightmare, aware that something was terribly wrong, unable to fix it, watching himself deteriorate. The morning Susan found him, she said she felt 2 things simultaneously: devastating grief and a terrible sense of relief. Relief that Robin wasn't suffering anymore. Relief that the disease had finally lost its victim, rather than continuing to torture him. "I know that sounds horrible," she said, "but when you watch someone you love be destroyed by their own brain, when you see them in such profound suffering with no hope of relief, there's a part of you that just wants their pain to end." Susan has worked hard to reframe how people think about Robin's death. It wasn't a failure of mental health treatment. It wasn't preventable through therapy or medication. It was a tragic end to a devastating disease.
"Robin didn't give up," Susan insists. "Robin fought harder than anyone I've ever known. He just ran out of weapons to fight with." The piece of paper with "help" written on it, Susan eventually had it analyzed by handwriting experts, trying to understand Robin's state of mind when he wrote it. They told her the handwriting showed stress, confusion, but also a desperate attempt to communicate. Even in his darkest moment, Robin was trying to reach out. Susan keeps that piece of paper in a private place. She's never shown it publicly, never allowed it to be photographed. It's too personal, too painful. But she talks about what it represents: a brilliant mind being destroyed from within, crying out for help that medical science couldn't provide. "If Robin's death does anything positive," Susan said, "I hope it brings attention to Lewy body dementia. I hope other families recognize the symptoms earlier. I hope more research gets funded. I hope someday there's a cure, so nobody else has to watch someone they love disappear the way Robin disappeared."
The world remembers Robin Williams for his laughter, his brilliance, his performances. Susan remembers him for his courage in facing an invisible enemy, his desperate fight to hold on to himself, and his final, heartbreaking plea for help. On August 11th, 2014, at 10:30 a.m., Susan opened a door and found that her husband was gone. But in the years since, she's learned that Robin had been disappearing for months, one symptom at a time, one terrifying night at a time. The man she said goodnight to on August 10th was already mostly gone, taken by a disease that had no mercy and no cure. And the word he left behind, help, stands as a reminder that sometimes, no matter how much we want to save someone, the disease is stronger. Robin Williams didn't want to die. He just couldn't survive what his brain was doing to him. And on that quiet morning in August, in a closed bedroom in their California home, the disease finally won.